Alrighty, that's us. That's us live. So, thank you for joining me. If you're already on the page, I know some of you guys already are. Big ups. I'm just setting up the last little things, but I really didn't want to be late to the stream, so I figured I would just, you know, turn on. But I am here. I am reading chat. I'm just setting up the last little couple little niggles that are hanging around. We do have. Um, I don't think my category updated. So we're just doing that stuff there. Well, it won't be a memento. Authorize, yes, please. We are live, which is always a good sign. But what are we live under? That is the question. There we are. It says we're playing Helldivers. We are not playing Helldivers. Just while I'm getting into it, though, I would like to run through the last fortnight of notifications on Twitch. We have Travis Lifts, thank you for following. Revisory Bacon 12, thank you for following. Rubes Plays, thank you for following. HPX Streamer, thank you for following. Groomlake Gaming, thank you for following. Lena VR, thank you for following. Shifty555, thank you for following and subbing. And you gave out a community sub. Fucking lit, dude. And that's our last fortnight there. So if I called out your name, tight, you're the best. Awesome, thanks for doing that. I don't have to do that, but I do appreciate the follows, and I especially appreciate the community sub and sub from 5555. Man, that's a mouthful. Now, let's have a look here. Kick's probably not got the right name either. Actually, talking about forgiveness. That's what I wanted to call it. Let's go just chatting. Lovely. Put my tags in. I did put a couple of tags in. No. I mean, I'm sorry if I say a lot of swear words, but I'm not going to mark it. Done. Alrighty. Lovely. So that's us. Oh, apparently my keyframe interval is too tight. Says it's fine. I had one unstable event, probably from when it was joining. So let's have a little look. See. Let's bring up the chat there. I do apologize if you have been talking in chat and I haven't seen it yet. I will be about to. Oh, buggery. Let's go settings, widgets, sausages, chat. Also, I rep Botrix. Hey, if you guys haven't used Botrix, it's free. I mean, they've got a paid version. I haven't used the paid version, but it is there. Let's have a look here as well. Nice. So I have added in some free emotes for you to use. They are purple bunny girls, as well as a lich, because obviously I theme myself around being undead. However, the purple bunny girl is my girlfriend, I believe. I feel like she is a purple-haired bunny girl on the inside. So, fucking short, man. That's what I get for being 5'5". I might set the mood lighting on too. I am hydrating as well. my mic's covering all of the candles. I think the candles add a nice kind of ambiance to the room. And I will also just white balance. That's nice. I think nice and actually a bit orange. Exposure a touch. That's nice. I think that's quite nice. And we'll lock the exposure because it shouldn't be changing. Just going to get my TikTok up too. Whoops. Do it here. No look. Alrighty there. So we'll bring that up with that one up too. I'll just be real quick about that. I do really appreciate the patience, everyone. Thank you. Alrighty there. So we do have TikTok live as well. So if you do want to, you'd rather watch on TikTok, it is there. I mean, it's up to you, really. Alrighty there. So, and I'd just like to see if my buddy Richard, or whatever he wishes to go by online, did say he might want to join me. So, if you do want to join the Discord, I'll drop the invite in chat. Here we are. And that's the Discord if you would like to join in on the stream. So, all right, we'll get into this one here. I would like to start by actually reading through this model of forgiveness, because I think this is probably an important place to start. This is the Enright process model of psychological forgiveness. Now, this is by Philip M. Sutton, Ph.D. I don't claim any of this work. I am going to read it out. And I would like to talk about how it makes me feel. I would like to talk about how I think it could be applied. And I would like to share some of these things because I feel like it is important for us to be able to forgive. Like without forgiveness, it's my view that, I mean, it's hard to really move forward with anything. I'm also just going to quickly put some music on. If you have song suggestions, please let me know. But for now, I'm just going to put on some chill lo-fi beats. Alrighty there. Now, if you have joined the live, thank you for joining. We are going to be talking about the Enright process model of psychological forgiveness. We do have some nice chill beats playing, so if you can't hear them, let me know. If my audio doesn't sound good, also let me know. But let's get into this. So, whether, when, and how may persons seek forgiveness from, and or effect reconciliation with someone who has offended them or whom they have offended? How may persons heal emotional wounds resulting from the real perceived actions or inactions of others? How may persons free themselves from the effects of the justifiable anger which is engendered by the emotional, physical, or sexual abuse or neglect? With these questions in mind, this paper considers the psychological process of forgiveness, how people who have been offended may give forgiveness, and how their offenders may request and or receive it, and of reconciliation, how two or more people, once having maturely given and received forgiveness, may then re-establish mutual trust. Sorry, I need a bit of a drink of water. A bit nervous, I don't know why. If I'm being vulnerable with you. So, where were we? We were... That's right. Specifically, this paper summarizes the Enright process model of forgiveness as theorized, researched, taught, and practiced by Catholic psychologist Robert Enright and his colleagues. Although Enright is a devout Christian, this model is essentially psychological and philosophical rather than religious or spiritual. The Enright model recognizes the religious mandate that to flourish spiritually, persons need to give or request and receive forgiveness when appropriate. In the service of this need, the model encourages those trying to forgive or be forgiven to use whatever spiritual or religious inspiration and resources are personally meaningful. But the model offers guidance for how anyone, whether their primary motivation is religious, moral, or psychological, may cooperate with the fundamental, universally human, psychological process of forgiveness. Now, what is forgiveness and what isn't? Enright asserts that forgiveness is essentially the foregoing of resentment or revenge. When the wrongdoer's actions deserve it, and instead of giving the offenders gifts of mercy, generosity, and love, or beneficence, man, I'm stumbling over my words today. When the wrongdoer does not deserve them. In other words, when people forgive, they essentially give up the anger to which they are entitled to, and give their offender a gift to which he or she is not entitled. Depending on the seriousness of the offence and the length of time that the person offended has lived with, and perhaps denied, the harm caused by the offence, forgiving may be a long, difficult, and painful process. Enright and his colleagues have found that a common major obstacle to forgiving is misunderstanding what forgiveness is. People who would benefit from giving sometimes mistakenly assume that to forgive, they must do what is impossible or even wrong. Another obstacle may be that one's parents or primary caregivers may never have shown forgiveness or may have modeled a pseudo-forgiveness. For example, saying, "I forgive you," sometimes may be a denial that any harm occurred or a self-defeating effort to control, manipulate, or gain moral superiority over the offender. In order to be willing to work towards forgiving an offender, people often need to be educated first about what forgiveness is not. For example, genuine forgiveness does not mean forgetting that the offence occurred, condoning or excusing the offence, renouncing efforts to obtain restitution or legal justice, or suppressing or no longer feeling anger about what happened. In addition, genuine forgiveness does not require that the offenders first admit their offences, ask for forgiveness, make appropriate restitution, or be willing and able to change their offensive ways. While it may be easier to forgive an offender who responds in these ways, one who has been offended need not remain trapped in unforgiveness due to the offender's inability or unwillingness to do so. Sometimes the offended may be unwilling or unable to forgive for less obvious reasons. An offended person may experience secondary gains from the victim's role. For example, the attention or influence that one gets from having been offended, or the power that one may feel, or the escape from emotional pain or depression from harboring resentment may reinforce unforgiveness, or the offended may genuinely try to forgive a certain offender but be frustrated because of the unknown need to forgive other prior offenders. For example, one spouse offended by another may need to forgive an opposite-sex parent, or someone who feels offended by God may need to forgive an offending parent or authority figure. Finally, genuine forgiveness need not, and sometimes ought to not, result in reconciliation. True reconciliation requires not only the offer of forgiveness by the offended, but also the acceptance that this gift by the offender and the ability of both parties to or establish mutual trust or interpersonal safety in their relationships. Prudentially, some offenders may be untrustworthy, unwilling or unable to change their offending ways. And some people who have been offended realistically may be unable or unwise to trust that their offenders have changed or will change. So I would like to break down this part just before we actually get into the 4 phases of forgiving. So if we have a look at this start here, whether, when, and how a person may forgive or seek forgiveness from and or effect reconciliation with someone who has offended them or whom they have offended. That breaks down whether or not to do it, when it is actually possible, and how someone can bring about it. That's what we're going to be talking about today. That's covered in the 4 phases that we are going to go here. We do bring in some caveats here about what forgiveness actually is, which I think is an important definition. I like the idea that the forgiveness is a gift. I also quite enjoy that it talks about pseudo-forgiveness. I think personally I have experienced times where I thought I was forgiving someone, but was doing what we talk here about the secondary gains. So it's that's not real forgiveness. I'm being okay with the fact of being a victim, and that's, I don't think, conducive to that reconciliation. They talk about how forgiveness is needed before reconciliation, and I also quite agree with that statement in my personal experience, and it's something that I would like to continue to institute into my life. The 4 phases of forgiving. In the Enright model, the process of forgiveness proceeds through 4 phases. In the uncovering phase, a person gains insight into whether and how the injustice and subsequent injury have compromised their life. This involves confronting the nature of the offense and uncovering the consequences of having been offended. A fundamental step in coming to offer forgiveness to an offender is clarifying the nature of the offense and how it has compromised one's life. This means determining as objectively as possible who did what to whom. One cannot forgive an offense that did not occur, although one may be able to resolve their anger aroused by a perceived offense, when the actual nature of the event is understood. And psychologically, people cannot forgive an offense committed against another, although they can forgive the secondary or indirect effects which they themselves do experience after someone else has been offended. For example, if someone abuses or a drunk driver hurts or kills a close family member or friend, one cannot forgive the abuse or drunk driving offense, but one can forgive the emotional pain, distress, and loss experienced by oneself because one's loved one was victimized. In addition to confronting the nature of the offense, uncovering the consequences of the offense includes understanding how both the original unfairness and one's reaction to this injustice have affected one's life. In this phase, a person must confront the objective nature of the offense and the objective and subjective harm or injuries caused by the offense. Sometimes a person may need help realizing the connection between not having forgiven and the experience of physical or psychological difficulties that are the result of suppressed or repressed anger. In counseling, this may involve discovering and working through various layers of pain, in addition to justifiable anger. Such layers of pain may involve shame, guilt, obsessive thoughts about the offender and or one's offense, temporary or permanent life changes due to the offense, and changes in one's view about the justice of the world and of God. Now, having a look at this phase here, this is the uncovering phase. So I like that Enright gives a model that is chronological. So the uncovering phase is the first part. I mean, how could you proceed with the subsequent phases without understanding these things? So a person gains insight into whether and how the injustice and subsequent injury have compromised his or her life. I feel like this sounds simple enough, however, when you actually attempt to do it, can be both uncomfortable, and I feel like it is very easy to be upset about what's not actually upsetting you. So the first part of the uncovering phase, where they talk about the objective nature, is to talk about the what's. What has happened, and who did it, and who perpetrated it. We aren't asking why, and we aren't, at this point in time, at the very start, we aren't talking about the feelings. We talk about our feelings as the consequences of this who did what to whom. Now, one cannot forgive an offense that did not occur. So, for example, if you have a perceived slight from someone, let's say you feel like you were ignored by someone you felt was important, let's say. Now, that person wasn't ignoring you. Then you could say, how could you forgive them for that? What they may have done, however, is they may have taken other actions that made you feel like they were ignoring you. The feeling of ignoring you was the consequence. Their actions that they may have taken were separate actions. For example, maybe they were distracted, maybe they were upset about something else. Perhaps they didn't portray their behavior in the way that they were meaning to. These things, although still could be, you could take offense at, or you could fill in really any reason. You don't really need a justification for your feelings. However, you can't then forgive someone for ignoring you when they didn't do it in the first place. Then you're forgiving something fake. So, psychologically, people cannot forgive an offense committed against another, although they can forgive the secondary or indirect effects which they do experience themselves. So, I think that's also an important distinction in taking that objective forgiveness part. You can't talk about someone else's who did what to whom and make it your own, because you have to answer that whom. Your what here, actually, if it was somebody else, would have to fill in this part. I like that they do outline that as well, because otherwise it can be, I think it is easy to, I think that takes away from the original victim, and I feel like it also possibly makes it harder to forgive. We also talk about, in counselling, this may involve discovering and working through various layers of pain in addition to justifiable anger. So I feel like obviously sometimes it's not as simple as X, Y, Z. And I know that they mentioned earlier about slights from other figures in lives and things like that. We often do carry these things with us, which is why forgiveness is important, because, we're talking about knock-on effects. So these things will continue to affect you because you have not been able to forgive them. Working through various layers of pain, I feel like, oftentimes would involve a factor of forgiveness. And working through those things, I think, is identifying the who did what to whom. I also like that we talk about justifiable anger, because again, the forgiveness is a gift. That is something that has been given to the offender out of the charity of your heart. You have said that I am choosing to forgive you, even though I have real, defined reasons to be upset. The reason I find that important is because it is often easy to equate forgiveness to saying that you were wrong. I feel like, at least for some people, I don't quite get it myself, but I know for some people that for them, forgiveness, at least at the end of the day, they have to feel like they have to admit that they were wrong about something, or that they overreacted about something, or that they shouldn't have been this upset overall, and that's not correct. When someone perpetrates something to you, and we've already identified that it was, by being objective about it, that these things did actually occur, that means that was real. If someone was to take that away from you, I would red flag, Now we move on to the decision phase. So in the decision phase, a person gains accurate understanding of the nature of forgiveness and makes a decision to commit to forgiving on the basis of this understanding. Although there are many religious, spiritual, and cultural mandates or mandates to forgive an offender, forgiveness is and must be a free choice. At least a person must be willing to become willing to forgive. For a person trapped in the prison of unforgiveness, deciding to forgive may involve realizing that what one has been doing to overcome the harm and suffering caused by an offense is not working. Deciding to forgive may begin when a person is, in 12-step words, sick and tired of being sick and tired. At this point, a person is not only pushed by the pain of unforgiveness, but also pulled by the hope that learning to forgive one's offender will free one offended from further avoidable suffering. So, at the end of this phase, the person stuck in and suffering from unforgiveness realizes that forgiveness is an option and makes a decision, however tentative or weak, to begin forgiving. Now, I have the hiccups. I like that this decision phase is so succinct. Look at this. That's compared to, these much larger things earlier. The decision phase is a very, very small step, but I do believe I feel like, at least for myself, this is probably the hardest step. I often find comfort in feeling anger about things or feeling slighted, as outlined earlier. So, although I may be able to work through some of those other things, it becomes hard to then make that next step. I find for myself that at a certain point, I do agree with the push by the pain side of things as well. I don't think it's necessarily you need to always be pushed by the pain, as they say, also pulled by the hope. But I find that oftentimes by not forgiving you, and again outlined here, that you are continuing a cycle of upset. The actions have already been done. They are in the past. Now, where we talk about that still being justifiable is important, because I feel like for myself that it's easy to become defensive, where you feel like, if you feel like that you do admit or do forgive, that you are somehow wrong. And if you're a defensive person, I think that can be quite hard. I'm quite defensive. That's why I say this is my anecdotal point of view. This isn't what is outlined here, but I feel that by relinquishing that, I've lost my control of how I view the situation, and I feel like it's taking away my, how do I say, I've got a victim complex, let's just put it like that. But when you are continuing to hurt yourself by not taking that decision phase, and I think that it is important, that you don't just go from looking at the problem to doing the work. You actually do need to make a conscious decision. And I have at multiple times been like, hey, I need to forgive this action because it is hurting me. I'm not continuing this cycle of thinking because it's healthy. I'm continuing it for X, Y, Z. And I then can't move into the working phase because instead I'm at best not doing the first, at worst not doing the first step. Or you end up just kind of re-going over this, and re-going over this, and re-going over this, and you don't make the decision phase. So outlining the decision phase as a conscious step is important in my view. The work phase involves actually working on forgiving. In this phase, a person gains a cognitive understanding of the offender and begins to view the offender in a new light, resulting in a positive change in effect about the offender, about the self, and about the relationship. Concrete actions in this phase commonly begin with working toward an accurate understanding of the offender. This reframing may involve rethinking the offensive situation or seeing the offender from a new perspective as a person who is in fact a human being and not evil incarnate. Clinical experience has shown that a person usually comes to think differently about an offender before feeling more positively towards them. Other actions in this phase include working towards realistic empathy and compassion for the offender, courageously and assertively bearing the pain caused by the offence, and finally giving the offender the moral gift of forgiveness. Psychologically, such beneficence cannot be rushed or demanded and may take a long time to achieve. Some clients struggling to forgive severe abuse find that a lessening of resentment towards their abuser is the closest that they get to their ideal goal of beneficence. So, talking about the work phase here, a person gains a cognitive understanding of the offender and begins to view the offender in a new light, resulting in a positive change about the offender, about the self, and about the relationship. So where we outlined at the start that you have to be objective, so you have to first get to the point where you can actually outline what happened. Once you understand what happened, you have to choose to actually make a conscious choice to forgive someone. It is a conscious process that you have to step through. It doesn't just, and I'm okay with it. I mean, I know a lot of people talk about time healing wounds, and I mean, I'm sure time dulls the pain, but I don't think it really, you don't get to hear just because it took a long time. We have to also, I think, understand when a perpetrator does something, you have to actually truly understand what they did. Otherwise, how will you be able to rationalize what they did, feel empathy for what they did, put yourselves in their shoes, and form that new positive opinion when you don't understand it? I feel like that is also part of understanding not evil incarnate. I think it's too easy to focus on how you felt or how you were slighted instead of what actually happened. And in that point, you're like, you made me feel bad because you're not nice, essentially, is what it often breaks down to, for me at least. Like, I'm like, that was not a nice action. And how can you move through this work phase without that first phase where we talk about the uncovering phase, and then making that decision, making the in the decision phase 2. We then make that decision. We come to use our now collated information about how that person did, or what that person did. We put themselves in our shoes. I mean, empathy is very important. I often, although I try quite hard, I often can find that I struggle with empathy for a variety of reasons, and I think that generally our society doesn't, although that we like to pretend it, tries to, I don't think it encourages empathy. Now, we see that clinical experience has shown that a person usually comes to think differently about a person before feeling more positive. So, I mean, I think that makes quite a deal of logical sense. We're talking about the what, by whom, by why. We're understanding that actual real version of offense. And we then, once understanding that, we can practice that empathy. We can think about why they did something. We can think about, where they failed. Sometimes people, it's not just, they misunderstood. Sometimes people do the wrong thing. I've done the wrong thing. Everyone, I don't even like to say makes mistakes. I mean, yes, makes mistakes, but that sounds almost too minute, doesn't have enough oomph. We fuck up, and I think having empathy about the fact that someone can just do the wrong thing. We aren't paragons of virtue sometimes. Sometimes we are bad people. And you need to be able to understand that person, to be able to actually think about, the things that might have been affecting that person, because, again, we are saying that they're not evil incarnate. And, I mean, unless you're dealing with Satan, which is unlikely, I think. So, And if you don't think differently of that person, if you still think that they are, if you can't make that step, how can you then start to feel more positively about them? You're stuck on that part where you're not actually changing any viewpoints. So how would your view of the person also change? I think is what that's trying to say. I think it's saying that without being able to change your view of the situation, your view of the person's, value to yourself does not change. That's how I would interpret it and how I would apply it to my life. I also think it's nice that I think it is an important step that such beneficence cannot be rushed or demanded. I do know that we were talking about people above earlier. We were talking about how some people will. It can be manipulation, essentially. The rushed or demanded, I think, is an important step, because I think if someone is demanding the forgiveness, it's not really grounded in a way that will achieve reconciliation. I think that because we're talking about this being a conscious effort, there are steps of. You have to make it through each step. Sometimes that step is going to take longer. Sometimes that step is going to be harder. And I feel that to try and rush through those steps means that you will not be able to process it properly either. I think it is important to as well accept that you may not truly forgive someone, as we are human, and we did already talk about the fact that the anger that you would feel to someone, or the hurt that you would feel from someone, is justified. So if you are talking about a justified hurt, you are correct in how you feel, right? And I guess for some things, we're talking about sometimes it's not wise to forgive someone. If someone did something, let's use a stupid example, Hitler. I'm sure that it's very hard to forgive Hitler. Hitler did terrible, terrible, terrible things. I would never say that we should just feel no resentment towards Hitler, right? Like, that person probably justifiably would not be deserving of a complete forgiveness. Like, but the idea is that you're forgiving for oneself. So a Holocaust survivor might take it upon themselves to make the steps to try and feel better about these things, because they want to improve themselves. And I think that is an important thing that this outlines. The forgiveness is not, you don't do it for the perpetrator, you do it to end the cycle that you're finding yourself in. Finally, in the deepening phase, a person finds increasing meaning in the suffering, feels more connected with others, and experience decreased negative effects and at times renewed purpose in life. In this phase, one may discover that in the process of forgiving, one finds release from the emotional prison of unforgiveness, bitterness, resentment, and anger. As one's ability to forgive deepens, one may find new meaning. One may find new meaning in one's suffering and a new purpose in one's life for having suffered unjustly. One also may discover one's own need to ask for forgiveness from others, perhaps even towards one's offender. So, we've done our first 3 steps. We've done the first step here, uncovering. We took a logical, objective view on what happened, who did it, so that we can move into the next step, where we then make a conscious decision to make forgiveness. Now that we have all our facts in our hands, we're holding all of our cards, we're reading everything there, we then make a conscious decision that we don't want to feel like that anymore, and we are going to give that charitable gift of forgiveness to that person. The work phase is then when that's step 3. Only at that 3rd step have we actually started to process the hurt and move through it. We need empathy, and we need understanding, and we need to remind ourselves that we are gifting our forgiveness to someone, even though they may not deserve it, and that we need to understand that, and as well, the perpetrator would need to understand that it cannot be rushed or demanded, or that sometimes complete forgiveness is not possible. Sorry, got those burpees. We then get into the deepening phase. So we've started working through those things, and this is where we're now seeing the outcomes of our work. We are seeing that we made a choice to decrease our negative feelings about it because it was a cycle of unforgiveness, bitterness, resentment, and anger. I mean, like, if you were to be upset by something that didn't feel resolved, you had perhaps a partner had slighted you, perhaps let's say your partner cheated on you, your partner has cheated on you, you would feel bitter, you would feel resentment and anger. Now, that's not just going to go away, that's an emotional prison. By doing these steps, we find that we are choosing to, let's say we're not even talking about the reconciliation, we're talking about finding increased meaning in the suffering, feels more connected with others, and experience decreased negative effect and at times renewed purpose in life. By forgiving someone, again, it's still not even about the reconciliation. You are instead trying to understand that person and put yourselves in that shoes, and I think that's empathy is always important for that. You can find new meaning in your own suffering, as in it wasn't just like if you were to be cheated on. I think new meaning would be like, let's say you were cheated on, you could feel quite insecure, you could feel quite betrayed. You might instead be able to understand why those things happen or how those things happened. And I think that is the outcome that you would be looking for from breaking that cycle. Because you can't really change the past, and you're not entering in it specifically for reconciliation, or you shouldn't be. One may also discover one's own need to ask for forgiveness from others, perhaps even towards one's offender. So you may find that in a situation that you felt justified anger by what someone had perpetrated against you, you've worked through these steps, and because you have your newfound perspective, empathy for that person, and you've been very objective about it, at this point you may actually find that you yourself have been the perpetrator, and you wish to show that you want to make amends. So, I mean, it's not bad to ask for reconciliation, but it is, like they said, it can't be rushed or anything like that, and it may be denied, and you have to be okay accepting that too as a perpetrator. I think also it's very easy to look at a problem and then work on it, but I mean, that's not the whole story most of the time. You might, like, let's go back to our cheating partner, for example. The person who cheated may have been, I mean, we're not justifying the actions. Remember, the first part is that your anger was justified, it was real. But they may have been reacting to things that, through this process, you've now realized that you have done wrong, and you want to try to do your best to reconcile that, or to at least make it better for that person, because you don't want them to suffer with your newfound empathy. And that leads us into requesting and receiving forgiveness. Initially, the Enright model of forgiveness focused primarily on understanding and helping people who have been offended to forgive. But in recent years, the effects on the offender of being offered forgiveness, the process by which an offender asks for forgiveness, and the process of genuine reconciliation have been theorized and studied as well. Even when focusing on the one who has been offended, in the deepening phase, those who have been offended may find it necessary to confront however they may have unjustly treated either their own offender, either before or after the offense, or others. Phases and guideposts for seeking to be forgiven parallel the phases or seeking to forgive. Offenders who want to be forgiven must confront the nature of their offense, uncover their own guilt and shame, and face the past and present consequences, including psychological, of their offense or offenses, both for themselves and for those whom they have offended. I just want, before we jump ahead, I would like to talk about this because we were talking about this deepening phase. I think that this deepening phase links quite nicely into this part. We already discussed that when one part of forgiveness is understanding that that person isn't just evil, and that means that there is the possibility that you yourself have to uncover your own guilt, shame, and face your past and present consequences. So by this deepening phase, it leads back into this part here where we're talking about you yourself as the offender need to work through those things. Deciding to seek forgiveness includes recognizing the need to ask for forgiveness, being willing to receive it if offered, and deciding to accept it humbly if and when forgiveness is offered. Working on actually receiving forgiveness involves working to understand how one's offense has affected the one offended, developing an attitude of gratitude for having been given an unmerited gift, doing whatever is possible to reconcile with the offended, including making restitution for any losses suffered by the offended when possible, and accepting the painful humiliation of admitting that one was wrong. Finally, the process of being forgiven includes working to find meaning in one's failures, deciding to and working on making positive changes in one's life, realizing one's common humanity, and experiencing freedom from lingering or inordinate guilt or remorse. So, I think that's quite important too, because, again, as someone who is, I mentioned before, I can be quite defensive. When you look at this, if you feel defensive, you might be like, hey, I didn't do that. Hey, I didn't do that. Hey, I didn't do that. And that's your automatic response, right? You don't by protecting yourself, and I think it's not even just defensive people, just people in general. We all want to protect our feeling of self. We all want to protect our ego. And being able to work through this forgiveness process and to then reach reconciliation, you need to be okay with the fact that you did do the wrong thing. I feel like this deepening phase is a good place to start, because it's often easier to start where you've been hurt, but you end up in this point here where you may find that you were also an offender. You then need to be able to be okay with, and we already talked about as well, that oftentimes people are upset at each other for separate things or following on things or related things, right? So it would be silly to think that one person just is like, you did the wrong thing, I forgive you, and then it's all okay. We then have to be able to, on the other side, be okay saying we were wrong. A lot of times as well, I think particularly with people that have been made to feel that they shouldn't feel okay for the things that they have done that are wrong, that it is hard to feel gratitude, as it feels like an unwanted burden, I would say. I've been around people who have, I don't think this is quite necessarily myself, but I've definitely been around people who struggle to accept forgiveness. I think it's because they, at the end of the day, they don't really think that they deserve this unmerited gift, which I guess you don't really, but the point is that you don't really deserve any gifts. Gifts are just given freely, right? And I quite like the word gift. The word gift here is an important distinction. Finally, the process of being forgiven includes working to find meaning in one's failures, deciding to and working on making positive changes in one's life, and realizing one's common humanity. We did talk about putting yourself in the other person's shoes and empathy. So again, both people have to feel empathy for each other. And you need to be able to remove yourself from that negative cycle as an offender as well. The humiliation is a good word as well. We don't like to have done the wrong things. We have social consequences that we receive for acting badly, and then we feel humiliated by them. And it's very easy to put up those walls as a method of protection, I think. But then you can't do the other steps because you're already safeguarding yourself. They said that it parallels. You have to do the same thing as an offender in reverse. Reconciliation. Reconciliation necessarily requires that two or more persons come together in a mutual respect and trust to establish or re-establish an ongoing relationship that is acceptable to both or all. This may become possible after the parties have maturely and perhaps mutually given and received forgiveness. At times, reconciliation may be unwise, if not impossible. The realistic possibility of re-experiencing a traumatic hurt, such as further emotional abuse, may counsel against having direct or future contact with an offender. So, again, I mean, this kind of, we already kind of covered some of this here in our discussion earlier, but reconciliation necessarily requires that two or more people come together in mutual respect. I think you can also read, like, respect as care about that other person and understanding for them. You then need to want to make these steps, again, making that conscious decision. And you have to be able to forgive each other first, because otherwise you're just carrying that hurt in with you. And it is also important to talk about that sometimes the reconciliation may be unwise. I mean, we go back to our Hitler example. It would be unwise for the Holocaust survivor to, in this hypothetical where Hitler is still alive, to then go into a room with Hitler and expect any kind of good discourse, because he's a crazy nutjob that killed millions of people, right? He's not going to do that. That's not possible. You've taken the steps on forgiveness for yourself, and this step you've decided is not going to be possible. That person is not going to be coming together in mutual respect and trust to re-establish an ongoing relationship. Hitler is not doing that, so why would you bother? Incomplete or premature forgiveness. So I'm quoting the text here. From my own experience and consideration, the forgiveness process requires two movements, both necessary for a person to truly forgive another and free themselves from any lingering emotions following an offense. The first movement involves the questions and efforts of the first or uncovering phase of the Enright model, which consists in developing compassionate understanding and acceptance of oneself, one's experiences, and all one's feelings. The second movement includes the second and third decision and work phases of the model, which consists of developing an accurate understanding and compassion for one's offender. Apologise. I've got the pasties for some reason. Sometimes persons who begin the forgiveness process find that they have difficulty completing it. In my experience, people who are more likely to get stuck for one of two reasons. In particular, clients who are religious may become stuck because they have forgiven prematurely, i.e. they have skipped, often unintentionally, the questions and efforts of the uncovering phase, while focusing on trying to understand and have compassion for their offender. Unfortunately, an accurate and compassionate understanding of their offender may make it more difficult for those offended to admit how much they were harmed or feel the proper level of anger. They may even feel guilty for resenting their offender if they realize the real limitations their offender had, e.g., their never having been loved well enough by their own parents, caretakers, or significant others, as we needed them to love us. It is important to remember that realizing why the offense happened, and especially if we understand that the offense was not intentional or personal, may explain, but does not excuse, condone, or minimize the offense, or its emotional and other consequences. Prematurely trying to give the forgiveness gifts of mercy and grace, not by themselves, release the anger and other feelings which the offense has engendered. I quite like this because I actually grew up quite Catholic. By choice, actually, I asked to be baptized when I was in grade 2. I had a religious family, but my father is nominally Catholic, and I found that by reading the Bible at the time that it really heavily resonated with me. Now I no longer am Catholic. I wouldn't say I really believe in God, but I do think that teachings and the views that I formed at that time definitely carried over. I think that I do often I take that I'm feeling hurt point, and I take that I want to not feeling hurt point, and I skip that phase that this guy here outlines. I've forgotten his name. And you aren't able to actually make any good steps. I've definitely had times where I wanted to forgive someone so I would stop hurting, and didn't really take any of the limitations and trying to make myself okay with it, or just kind of like, ooh, just water off the turn the other cheek, like it, just essentially ignoring it. And then you feel, because you've made that decision to forgive that person, when you then still feel upset because you haven't done any of the things that you needed to stop feeling upset, you then feel guilty because you've made that decision that person should have been forgiven and that you're not meant to feel bad about them. Now you're feeling bad about them and you're the bad guy because you're like, no, I've forgiven them and I'm still holding it against them. But you haven't done any of the work, so how would you stop feeling bad about them? But you haven't taken those steps because you've jumped them. You've gone, you're not even looking at the picture like that. I think also the understanding, they may even feel guilty for resenting their offender if they realize the real limitations their offender have, e.g. never having been loved well enough by their own parents, caretakers, or significant others as we needed them to love us. So I do think understanding, and we talked about empathy, is important, but again, it's not really an excuse. And I mean, I've definitely felt specifically this as well. But I wouldn't give myself the same graces. And so why would you give it to other people? Why would you look at someone and say, I wouldn't give myself the ability to be like, oh, well, I did this, so fuck it. Like, it's why I did it. I mean, some people do. I've definitely encountered people that just, we all have, right? We got that person that thinks that, oh, I've got a reason to do it, so that's why I did it. And it's like, okay, well, you still did a shitty thing. If anybody knows me personally, you know exactly who I'm talking about. Yes, it's that person who I'm thinking of. But a lot of people, I think as well, that is probably that defensive mechanism where they don't want to take on that perceived, they don't want to take on that perceived guilt and humiliation, so instead they rely on their justifications of it and never actually move through these phases. And I mean, their life, their loss, right? They can, if they want to be upset, they can't do anything. You can't do anything about that. That's their choice. I think that prematurely trying to give the forgiveness gifts of mercy and grace will not by themselves release the anger and other feelings which the offense engendered. I think often I think it is often in a noble, comes from a noble place that you might want to give someone mercy and grace, because they are virtuous. We all, at least most of us, try to live by the things that we would find virtuous and important to ourselves. And I would say that for a lot of people, that mercy and grace would be things that they want to give. But as outlined before, you can't just give mercy because it has to come from understanding first. And by just focusing on the end goal here, you aren't actually able to do the work to have real mercy and grace. So that's my thoughts on that. Another place someone may get stuck is in the uncovering phase, become very aware of the emotional and other life consequences of the offense, but finding it too difficult to move into the decision, let alone the work phase. A person may have attempted the decision or work phases only to find that lingering or intense feelings have led them back into the issues of uncovering phase. Or if a person has developed one or more self-defeating, including compulsions or addictions, as a ways of numbing the pain or self-medicating the leftover feelings. They may find it difficult even to simply feel, let alone deal with the feelings. Once a person realizes and accepts that they were and are a victim, the benefits of this role, sometimes not clearly perceived, and the cost of relinquishing being a survivor in order to become a thriver may be more than they are actually ready to pay. For such persons, realizing the cost of remaining a mere victim or survivor and the benefits of becoming a thriver, as well as experiencing the witness and support of others who successfully have forgiven past offenders, may enable the would-be forgiver to finish the course. So we look at this point. This actually strikes quite close to home for me. I definitely have developed as a defense mechanism victim complex. I definitely find that self-ruminating, those obsessive thoughts, the justification that you can tell yourself that you didn't do the wrong thing is comforting. The anger that you feel is a way of expressing your pain without actually having to deal with uncomfortable things. And often by numbing the pain, you're feeling the feelings you would have felt, but you're not really understanding them. You still feel the bitterness, you still feel the anger, you still feel all the things that we're talking about in this forgiveness stage to move past that cycle. But you aren't able to unpack it. We then come into the point where we're trying to do the right thing, we think we're going to do the right thing, and then because of those limitation one has, that we then had to go back and, actually, I thought I had the objective, who did what to why, whom, and all of that shit, but we didn't actually have all of those answers, and the preceding steps rely on it. It's also then, as we talked about, emotionally hard sometimes to want to. And we said that in the decision phase that you are making a conscious choice to forgive someone. If you don't want to, you're not making that choice. That's not what you're doing. And so you've chosen to instead continue being a victim. People also find that, as a man, I would say I receive less of this, but I definitely do to some extent. And I think for some people it's probably stronger, where people enjoy the attention, I should say, of people feeling bad for them. People will do you favors. People may give you emotional validation. You see it happen a lot where, a girl and a boy in a relationship, or two people in a relationship, I would say that in my experience it's probably often the feminine side that's probably going to receive more of this outpouring of help, or of I guess you could say support and validation. You might have people like a partner splits, their partnership splits. Someone who was we'll say in this circumstance, they're feeling like a victim, or they are a victim. They may not be the only victim, but they are a victim. They leave that relationship. People will then look at that person, and for whatever reasons, so for example, other people with sexual intent might be wanting to validate that person so that they gain favor with them. We look at love bombing and things like that. I think that oftentimes people take advantage of victims because they know that they can successfully feed into that want for support and validation, and I think that's often why it is the feminine side that probably gets it more to an extent, because oftentimes people are going to feel more sorry for them. I'll bring up some sources at the end, so please don't cancel me, but I have read some stuff about that, and we often see that there may also be ignoble reasons why those people would get more attention, whereas men, we're all just walking around with dicks out. So it's not exactly like we don't we don't need to be manipulated like that to try and take our pants off. We're usually quite willing to just do it. You don't need to manipulate us so hard. There's with less of that decision there. It is helpful for those stuck at any phase of the forgiveness process to remember that the grieving and forgiving process are two sides of the same coin, and that feeling and dealing with our past unmet needs, unhealed hurts, unresolved feelings, etc., always requires assertive self-care. If our offender continues to mistreat us or others whom we care about in the present, we must learn to self-protect and self-care, as well as help others to do so if necessary. On the one hand, we may find it necessary to limit contact with our offender. Also, as stated above, reconciliation, meaning either restoring the relationship to one as good or even better than in the past, or developing a good enough relationship for the first time, may not be wise and or possible. On the other hand, genuinely forgiving someone who did and could not love us as we deserved may enable us to both accept their current and chronic limitations and have a better relationship with them for all of its limitations than we could have had without our efforts to forgive. So, any phase, any of those steps, that the grieving and forgiving process are two sides of the same coin. You feel grief and then you make a decision to flip that coin onto the other side. You had justified feelings. Remember, we were talking about how they were justified. Dealing with your past unmet needs, unhealed hurts, unresolved feelings. So your justified needs means that your forgiveness is a justified ends, regardless of the outcome. We then look at this part where we must learn to self-protect and self-care, as well as help to do others to do so if necessary. If our offender continues to mistreat us or others whom we care about in the present, we must learn to self-protect and self-care to do so if necessary. So sometimes you want forgiveness, you want reconciliation, but you're stuck on this step because that person is not changing those unmet needs. They're not changing those unhealed hurts, and they're not fixing those unresolved feelings. And I'm not sure why Twitch is giving me notifications about pre-roll ads. I thought I always had it disabled, so lit. Like how can you then, like what, you're just going to constantly go through step 1, 2, 3, and then back again because that person is doing the same things. Like you have to be okay with the fact that they're not the other part. You can't control people. I mean, people try, but you, at the end of the day, you can't make someone think or do anything. So I think also that's important because, like, for example, you may have a parental figure that hasn't been able to give you love. I think a lot of people especially in my generation, have lots of problems with negligence, and I don't mean just not being given enough food or whatever. I mean also emotional negligence. You know, kids raised by TVs, kids raised by emotionally absent parents, for whatever those parental reasons are. You may go through this process of trying to make yourself feel better, make that choice, but you can't fix anyone, so they have current and chronic limitations to their personality. By understanding that, like we were talking about, unmet needs, unhealed hurts, unresolved feelings. So if we were to apply that to our child that experienced neglect trauma, we're looking at a parent who is unable to meet their needs, unable to resolve their feelings. You aren't going, you don't go to McDonald's and get mad when you can't buy a pizza. You understand that McDonald's has limitations. They have a menu. You can buy cheeseburgers, you can buy fries, you can buy Big Whoppers, you can buy sundaes, you can buy Coke. You can't buy a pizza at McDonald's. I mean, maybe in some country. At least in Australia and America, I know you can't buy pizza at fucking McDonald's, man. So that's a limitation that McDonald's has. So by understanding that you're not going to get pizza at McDonald's, you're not going to go to McDonald's and be upset when you don't get it, because you only go to McDonald's when you want a Big Mac, a fries, and a large Coke. You're like, that's what I go there for. that's still a good relationship. It's just a relationship with limitations. And that's much better than continuing to feel those unmet needs of McDonald's pizza. Appendix: helpful questions and guideposts for forgiving. So this is where we start to unpack and actually do the work for each step. Now, we've talked about the general overview and the general steps, but I guess this is a methodology. So as I read this, if you are kind of been reading along and you feel like maybe some of these things have applied to you, I'm going to go through this slowly so that we can oh, hang on, sorry. I'm just going to respond to this message. I've been reading the whole time. Oh yeah, let's have a little chat with Richie. Yeah. Hey Richard, are you there? Oh no, it's a ring.
Hello, hello.
Hello. How you doing?
How am I coming through? Am I audible?
I believe so. I can hear you, and every time you talk, it registers on my how you say, like, OBS. So I think you're good. Were you listening along by any chance?
Yeah, absolutely, my man. I've been enjoying the whole thing. It's
Nice. Well, I mean, did you have any thoughts on? We're about to talk about the phases here. How did the did you want to take it phase by phase, or did you have any general thoughts that you wanted to start with?
Is there an echo coming through? Let me see if I can sort out my settings here.
Oh, I'm getting a slight echo. It may be my microphone picking it up.
It's almost certainly me, my man.
Oh,
Let me
yeah,
see if I can sort this.
Lovely. I'm just gonna have a little quick drink break. Lovely. Oh, fuck it. Can't even drink properly, man. Oh, why's my phone falling down so far? Thank you for being patient, anybody on the stream. My boy here is just fiddling with his settings, so we won't be too long.
Okay, I think we're a lot closer to it right now.
Sorry?
I think we should be a lot closer right here. How we go?
Look, there's a slight echo, but I don't think it's too bad.
I'm gonna mute the stream and then we're Gucci, brother. I think I've sorted it out.
Yeah, mute my stream. You just, if you could bring it down to like 1%, so I can still get the viewer, that would be lit. But otherwise, yeah, I think if you mute it, it doesn't count as a viewer, which is a bit unfortunate. If you do it like 1%,
I can sort that, motherfucker. Or I can actually just, yeah. I think we should be set right now. How's the echo?
I mean, I can't hear it, so I'm sure stream can't.
Beautiful. I think we're all set. Yeah, no, wonderful conversation so far, my man. And actually, a pretty fantastic article which you found, I guess, that you're reading through.
Yeah, I think it's quite nice.
It's the main message I was thinking about is the release, the one. I mean, primarily the motivation for forgiveness, right? Why ought one to forgive?
Yes.
So, regardless of the process, is there a benefit to it? And I have always deeply felt that forgiveness is something you can give to yourself, you can give to others, and
Hmm.
it's for you primarily, right?
Yes,
I
I
think
would
there's
agree.
a proverb about holding on to a hot coal, right? And it's like if I hold on to this, will it hurt the person who hurt me? Most likely not. And
Yes.
so releasing is the main thing I think about in that context. And this framework is a really cool way to think about this process as well. I've never been too deeply into specific frameworks for this kind of thinking, uh, but in heavy circumstances, I think the number one thing you need to do is trust the instruments, right? You know, if you have a
Yeah.
pilot of a thing, you want to trust the instruments, and so you want to have functional systems in place to guide you.
Yeah, exactly. Um, I think, do you think that you mentioned that it's something you do for yourself? I find that, at least, that when they talked about the perpetrator or the offender needing to be able to accept the forgiveness as a gift, I think understanding that the person giving it is doing it for, like, I say selfish, not in a bad way, but for selfish reasons. Do you think that's almost comforting? Like, as a someone who is the offender or someone who's the perpetrator?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there are temptations in like all of these conversations to lean on aspects of this process for comfort or for reassurance to oneself, right?
Yeah.
But I think fundamentally, what I would view as the goal of the process is to release oneself from the need for that kind of comfort in the context of offense and of committing offense.
Hmm.
Uh, what one aims to do, I suppose, is to release, or at least that's tends to be my hope and goal in my engagement with these situations. But there
Nice.
are situations in which you need to re-engage with the person who's done something bad to you. They are, an obligatory force in your life,
Hmm.
and so in that context, I think structure is the key, right? And structure and boundary setting, goals is the real key because you can release as much as you'd like from yourself, but if you allow yourself to go back into situations or to repeat behaviors that end in bad outcomes,
Yeah.
then you're going to get hurt again and again and again. So forgiveness, I think, hopefully comes with a release that removes the compulsion to, require something from that person.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it does. If I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that you the reasoning for it has to be because you are seeking to relieve yourself of that burden.
Yeah, to be at peace, right? And some sense of it is that we mustn't aim for our goal to be, I am in a state of pleasure or joy at my total non-commitment to this thing that happened to me. No, it's a much more Taoist sense of be in the middle, right? So
Hmm.
the very bad things and the very good things, treat them both the same, and notice them as imposters. It's life, it's living. And forgiveness can take you there in an ideal place because I think there are ways to do forgiveness that will push you on that Taoist, on that Taoist scale too far towards the happy side of the wheel. Where you're like, oh, look what I did.
Yeah.
I'm so virtuous. But I think really the productive way to view the process is to some extent with goals in mind, and for me, for those goals to be oriented around release
Hmm.
and then sensible action as required. Um,
So forgiveness is almost only, or is real forgiveness and accomplishing the goals when one is being true to oneself. Is that, would that align with your views?
yeah, I think certainly. I mean, primarily one of the deepest foundations of a lot of philosophy, if you read it down to the root, tends to be that there has to be one debt which is filled first.
Yeah,
and that debt is the debt to yourself.
it's
You
true.
know,
Well, you have
if
to look
you
after number one, right? I mean,
well,
that's the golden rule.
but not even just looking after yourself,
Mm.
right? You know, filling in the sense that you are the priority, because once you have released your sense of you know, guilt or anger, and you are now at peace, well, then perhaps you can assess the situation in a way that is productive, right?
Yeah.
And so, to some extent, pursuing forgiveness with the goal being anything to do with the one you are forgiving, you may lose the forest for the trees. You may end up, uh, you know, diminishing yourself in the pursuit
Hmm.
when perhaps you should, you know, completely release yourself and then pursue that engagement. Um,
I agree. I would say that lines up with the uncovering phase that they outline, and I believe that that talks about like they then talked about some of those limitations where I think it links back into this a bit where they were talking about in the reconciliation side that incomplete or premature forgiveness. I think by nature of the fact that you're not doing it for oneself, it's always going to be premature. Would you agree?
Absolutely, and
100.
very well read of the text, and it's a fascinating reflection that, as you know, someone who is following along but hasn't been taking notes, there are things in my personal philosophy or reading that seem to reflect these same kind of principles. Which again, it's important to have frameworks.
Yeah,
You're as good as the structure you've got when the emergency hits.
yeah,
So in times of true strife, I think to some extent, at least for modern people, really esoteric, you know, philosophical principles can be useful, but somewhat impractical. And so something more practical, like a checklist or a set of procedures or stages to go through in terms of your forgiveness. You know, your perhaps one's personal emotions may not necessarily, you know, perfectly fit each of these stages,
no, I mean
but to
everyone is
use
so
them as a
individual.
goal is, you know, that strikes me as a productive way to achieve something. And I mean, like we said at the very beginning of this conversation, what's the goal of forgiveness? You know, why would one endeavor to forgive? And I
Yeah,
think the truth is apparent to all people. Uh, Holding grudges, holding hatred, holding wounds that you have sustained in the past in your mind, repeating them in your mind, is non-productive. It hurts us.
it
So why
does.
would anyone ever endeavor to forgive? It seems to be because it's useful for you.
Yeah, exactly. Like I mean, sometimes you might, I guess, develop soothing mechanisms where you hurt yourself to feel better in the short term, but at the end of the day, you are just hurting yourself. And also, sorry to interrupt here, even though they are a bot, thank you, Martins FRER5. I will not be hitting you up on Discord to generate followers, but I do appreciate the follow. Thank you. Um, but I think as well, if we take a little bit of a sideline there, if that's okay, um, I find that frameworks for myself can be quite useful because well, I'm autistic, so I find it quite hard sometimes to just feel my emotions and understand them properly. And I think sometimes frameworks like this, where it takes it, I mean, you're still thinking about your emotions, but it takes it away from that present physical time to a point where you're instead like pondering or making decisions about things actually allows me to work through those things in a productive way in which where sorry I would not have done prior, you know.
100%. And you know, it's again fascinating. These things are reflected through multiple schools of philosophy or therapy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, biblically speaking, the word is, you know, the thing which creates reality. And so these structures can very much so be considered just the spoken word, right? It's a thing you tell yourself about how things are going, what's moving, what's happening, and the it's a very uniquely human uh, I suppose, benefit. It's a very uniquely human grace that we have to
Mm-hmm.
think like that, to be able to structure things,
Mm-hmm.
and very much so. I think for almost everyone to endeavor to structure your thoughts somewhat more so is a very good thing. I suppose my only counter thought to any of these lines of thinking
Yeah, of
is
course.
that one thing that I am trying to do frequently is not think in stories too much.
Yeah.
And I've observed, I suppose, in my own experience that sometimes the more that I try to work on a thing, the more complex the story gets. And if my mind is like a sandbox and I'm pouring water down the box, the tracks are getting run and they get deeper every time I run them.
Yeah.
So the more I have that conversation with myself about perhaps an injury or a wound or a slight or a failure, the more those tracks are, laid into my neurology. There's certainly a conversation about the cells that fire together get stronger. So there's a the analogy to water down a hill is very much so somewhat backed up in the science.
Yeah.
But more so than that, I found it true for myself that when I rehearse things by pouring over them, uh, it can very much so be non-productive
It's like a form
because
of
there is a
rumination for
freedom to
yourself.
be found with certain kinds of offense and slights,
Yeah.
just by dropping them.
I feel like as well, if you're, I would say, if you, where you were talking about that release or that benefit to yourself, it's easy to tell yourself that you are trying to. I guess possibly some of these frameworks may give you extra tools to tell yourself that you are doing the right thing. Where from what I'm understanding from you, we're talking about like rumination or like where I talked about I have a bit of a victim complex. I would say that I relate to your words where it's nice being able to tell yourself that you're the victim, and if you can then also tell yourself that you're doing all the right things to try and not be a victim, that's even more dangerous, I guess, in a way. Hey.
Absolutely, that's exactly it, my
Mm,
man. You've
mm.
picked up on the. I certainly am not expressing myself as best as I possibly
No, no,
could
no, no,
right
no.
now. But that
I'm.
idea of the stories
You're
is
expressing yourself
exactly
very
what you
well,
hit.
buddy. What do you want to get called on stream? Just BT Dubs,
You can call me Richie. That's fine.
Richie. Alrighty. Well, Richie, no, you are expressing yourself well. I'm not asking to um, like clarify per se, but more just to internalize and understand. So please don't feel like you're explaining yourself badly. You're actually quite eloquent and you're very well put together with your. I've understood everything you've said so far. You've said yes to every time I've said something.
No,
So
100%, 100%. And I mean, I have become somewhat distracted here. The stream's looking fantastic, by the way. You've got the in picture going beautifully. The lighting is very good.
is it?
Uh,
I put
you
candles
know,
on. Do you want to see my candles? I can take my camera around. Go for a little trip.
it's all set, man. I mean, the quality is also very high. Like this is a good camera.
Yeah, I got a new Pixel 7, dude. It's pretty good. I'll ref it. It's nice.
Fantastic.
Get to see my close-up fingerprints. It's actually my phone camera. I'm using an app called Droid Cam, um, which is it's free if you want to do low quality. But I mean, the main point is that it's not low quality. Um, I haven't set it up so that it can use USB yet. You need to turn on some settings. But I'm currently actually running it off Wi-Fi, so it's just my camera running on my Wi-Fi network. That I'm then using as a webcam, which I think
Dude,
is
it's gunning. It's going fantastic. I mean, it's coming through loud and clear for me, so
yeah,
we're all
nice.
set.
Well, thanks for giving me the feedback because sometimes when I don't really have anyone watching, I've gone back to um I've gone back to like publish things on YouTube. And I'm like, I can't fucking use this because no one told me that it was bad. I didn't. I'm not watching my own stream. I'm streaming, right? And then I end up being like, this is utter shite. No one doesn't watch. I can't use any of
No,
this,
dude.
you know.
No, it's been you've read this all very well and super coherently. It's been engaging. The music levels were correct. Like I was actually vibing out when I took your call just here. I was in a StarCraft game and
Oh,
I abandoned
really?
that
I mean, you
mode.
love your StarCraft. We still haven't played StarCraft, man.
No, it's not crazy difficult. There's essentially for the three races, there's a little list of things you can just do, like a pilot's checklist for the first maybe 3 minutes. That'll just put you in a reasonable place to contest in any game. And the actions per minute required to fulfill that checklist is not, it's like maybe 65 or 70.
Yeah.
And then you get into fighting when your ABM has to, skyrocket. But anybody could do the checklists. It's just you have to be bothered to fucking learn them. And I learned them when I was young, so I'm lucky.
Yeah. I mean, do you feel like for like StarCraft that it's almost um like, when people take I mean, you were talking about Taoism and being present. Do you find that it's almost like like how do I put this? Like a series of actions that you're going to take, and that in of itself is rewarding because you kind of know what you're going to do and you know how to try and win. So you're just kind of like going through a set of actions because you know it so well. I'm like, nah, not really.
No, very much so. It's about honing the actions down to their. I mean, especially of me, the way that I play, honing it down to its absolute minimum necessary for the moment. And so, certainly in those first 3 minutes, although it comes down to running through a checklist and just doing the actions at the right second,
Mm.
what it feels like is more like practicing something to try and do it just clean. Because there are these microseconds between when you have enough supply to produce the next worker and you need to put the pylon down, these sorts of things.
Mm.
If you gain a half a second or a second in those actions, it can really make a difference,
Mm.
especially when you're playing in the shit leagues like I am, where everybody just cheats and fucks around early in the game.
Yeah.
So very much so. It feels more to me, or equivalent to me, like just practicing something for the sake of trying to do it cleanly when I'm doing it well. Because I don't really give a shit if I lose a StarCraft game,
Yeah.
and that's
Right. Like.
also part of the good thing about it is that you learn to play games that you're happy losing, which is another reason why I really love StarCraft. It's not a team game. You play 1v1, and when you lose or you win, it's like chess. You really have to sit there and say, "I he got me," and why would I care? We're playing chess. Why not?
Yeah. Exactly. Like. Sorry to keep getting all fucking metaphysical about shit, but I mean, we're talking about I've lost my track of thought. Never mind, it'll come back to me. But yeah, so we're playing StarCraft. I find that actually, although I'm really glad that you get that benefit from StarCraft, and maybe that's why I've never gotten into it as much as you, is that I don't really enjoy that. I mean, I'm okay losing. I think and this actually I remember what I was saying. The like being able to lose, I think it is an important skill. Like otherwise, if you can't take an L, I mean, what you're just gonna take your first hit and just like about shit in life, like. You got to be, and I think practice losing, just like you have to practice falling off a bike or whatever to
100%,
reduce harm, is
my man.
important.
Have you seen the Bruce Lee conversation about learning to die? There's a scene from one of his movies where
Oh,
he really elucidates exactly this.
no, but let me find it and share it. Um, Bruce. Oh, shiver me timbers. Don't be showing
Now
people.
I need to do a little searching. Now that there's a video of a compilation of Bruce Lee shit that I know it's in, but if you search Bruce Lee, The Art of Dying, I'm pretty sure the one that comes up, Bruce Lee videos, is going to be that video. But you'll find something about it if you search Bruce Lee, The Art of Dying.
Bruce Lee, The Art of Dying. I think it's come up on Mind Smash. Here, let me just bring it up onto YouTube, and I will just bring it back onto my stream.
You must free your ambitious mind.
There we go. We will full screen this.
Like everyone else, you want to learn the way to win, but never to accept the way to lose. To accept defeat, to learn to die is to be liberated from it. So when tomorrow comes, you must free your ambitious mind and learn the art of dying.
Yellow.
Dude, that is
This
some
means you're less likely to get in
powerful
your
shit.
own way if you no longer fear failure.
Bruce Lee's
Once you
he
accept
was a
that,
wonderful
you're no
philosopher,
longer worried
man.
about what
I
could happen.
recommend you
When you're no longer worried about
watch him speak. There's some long form stuff on YouTube, but I mean, he wrote poetry extensively, personally, and you know, through his martial arts, ended up being a pretty developed philosopher. You know, his personal philosophy really shone through, and his family have thrived. You know, he was clearly the kind of individual who had worked out how to do things in a way that helped him and others. And that, I mean, that's a line from a movie,
Yeah,
but
right.
he was in movies that he responded to the philosophy of, and he also wrote a lot of his own lines. And
Yeah.
his poetry reflects exactly that kind of notion. But that's a martial arts, that's an Eastern philosophy thing. The art of dying, right? What we all do is strive to learn how to win.
Mm-hmm.
There is an art in the release of knowing that you know how to lose, or that you can lose, that it's totally fine, you know. And this comes to some extent with, hand in hand with that forgiveness conversation for me, because that idea of knowing how to die and release, freeing your ambitious mind.
Mm-hmm.
That's that same release with someone who it's like two galaxies hitting each other, and you end up spiraling in and in and in, and there's this great cloud and mess. And part of that attractive force is the lack of freeing your ambitious mind. Release your ambitions for this project, and instead focus on those things which you can control yourself, right? Which is the release for oneself, first and foremost. Once you are well, then you can take good things to the people who matter. And once you are well, perhaps you'll see your own faults, as this structure suggests, and then you can make amends for those kinds of things. But the first step is the priority in the endeavor of forgiveness. That this is a thing I do because I no longer wish to carry this hot coal with me.
Mm-hmm.
And you can be moved from that path, or you can be distracted from that goal by the level of emotional affect that's brought out by any kind of fucking mad behavior. But fundamentally, I think at the heart of forgiveness is that, right? Is that there is, I mean, if we want to go into the really, spooky side of it, this is a huge part of Christianity. This is a huge part of the nature of
Oh yeah,
many
100%,
global
man.
religions, is
I
to
mean,
free oneself
yeah,
through grace, by forgiving oneself, by
dude, like
releasing
half the
oneself
New
to
Testament
forgiveness.
is just like forgive people, like, and I don't always think it, or at least it doesn't always get conveyed that way about doing it healthily, but like it does at least outline how important it is. It even for our own souls. Our own souls aren't like our own souls need to be forgiven. We all need to be forgiven. We are all sinners, and by sinners you can read offenders or perpetrators. And we must understand that just as you are a sinner or a perpetrator, and so is it makes more sense if I frame it the other way. Just as you may remember that your neighbor is a sinner or a perpetrator, and that you may be a victim, you yourself are a sinner or a perpetrator. And I think that's an important tool for empathy, by understanding that you are not so dissimilar. And I think that's where I grew up quite
Oh
Catholic.
yeah, I mean,
so
certainly that's one element of this of the Christian ideals that link to the idea of forgiveness and how we pursue that. but I suppose what I was going for primarily there was more so the primary, divine characteristic, or the characteristic of the experience with Christ. And primarily what people are supposed to be experiencing or attempting to experience with every sacrament if they're Catholic, but also through their own personal communion with God if they're Protestant or any of the other denominations. What you're aiming to attain is grace, and grace is a form of forgiveness that comes from releasing yourself to the divine, right? And I don't think we need to necessarily think of the divine in the context of this conversation. We can view those two systems, right? To release oneself to this divine forgiveness and then attain grace. We can just change the words, and it becomes a very similar system to this forgiveness process, which is that
Well,
what
yeah.
you are trying to do is release the emotions initially to get to a place where you can, move past the hurt, release the cold, and from there realize, okay, well, if I've been given grace, if I've earned that grace for myself by releasing a hurt someone has done to me, and that's also fundamental, right? You earn grace by forgiving.
It's true.
It happens to you.
Mhm.
So, that same forgiveness structure kind of does this, and it's a biblical thing too, that once you've received grace, you tend to aim to forgive others who have sinned. And the ultimate ideal of that process is a Christ ideal, which is that you would then give yourself willingly for sinners who didn't even hurt you. You would willingly say, okay, this is fine. I forgive you, and in my forgiveness, I am, killed or whatever.
Yeah.
But it doesn't need to go that far, and it doesn't even need to have the kind of spiritual backdrop, because the philosophy is mirrored, as we've discussed, right? There are Taoist principles here, there are Christian principles here, or I suppose I would say Abrahamic principles, because
Yeah.
these things are reflected through all those big three,
True.
and Buddhist principles as well. So this stuff is it's somewhat universal. And I think, again, I suppose a closing statement on the conversation would be that the structure you've outlined during that reading strikes me as a very useful way to formulate one's thoughts in this endeavor.
Yes, I would agree. And I just would like to point out, perhaps you missed it at the start, or perhaps you do remember and it influence your views on it, but the man who came up this Enfield is a devout. Oh, I dropped my camera. Sorry to be distracted. Is a devout Christian.
There you go.
So it definitely flavored that by that. But I also find it quite interesting that you and I feel like I mean I especially about Taoism. I'm quite interested in Taoism, but I'm not very knowledgeable of many other Abrahamic religions um or of Buddhism really. But it's interesting that you're more knowledgeable and you could see these parallels, which almost indicates that it is maybe potentially less of a spiritual experience and more of a innately human, or at least it not. I mean, apparently rats even have empathy, but a living experience, I guess you could say that
Absolutely.
that we
Absolutely.
run
And
through
I
these
think
processes. It's like an experience of life almost.
one of the most important things to realize once you get to that conclusion is that the utility or the consolation we as modern people can take from philosophy and religion tends to be massive if you allow it to be beneficial to you, right? So the fact that these things are reflected across all these places, you don't need to buy into any kind of uh, fundamental view of the nature of reality
Yeah.
to take meaning and to have deep respect for these fascinating and complicated stories. Now, you can go even further than that with many of these things if you need to. But
Yeah.
what you'll find, I suppose what many people will find if they engage with any of these kinds of philosophies is that the things which are spiritual and a bit spooky very often tend to just resonate with them in their life experience, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, if we're ready to go into it, what are we to make of the feeling of forgiveness, or the feeling of release?
Yeah.
Is that not semi-divine? The notion that you've been able to somehow make a change inside your mind that produces a bodily state, a consciousness change that then makes you happier, freer, more comfortable in the future.
I
So
mean, yeah,
to
I hadn't
imagine that you
really
have to
thought
throw
about it
out
like that, but yeah,
spiritual thought is risky, I think. And I think to also imply that spiritual thought needs to be taken literally or needs to be considered something that's necessary is risky as well. So I mean, and hell, the Taoists got this one again. It's about being in that middle ground, right? You don't thrust anything away or hold anything too tightly.
of course. And sorry to
And
interrupt. Henderson19, thank you for the follow. Um, I'm sorry if it may be just a bot. I've got my Discord server linked in on my channel. So if you did want to leave your recommendations on there, that would be fantastic. Sorry to interrupt. There, Richie.
no, absolutely, my man. Always good. We got to get the shout outs in. It's
I got to
critical
get
for
them
the
soon,
stream.
otherwise people think I've forgotten about them.
Hell yeah, my guy. I'm 100% with you. Well, look, I think we're coming up to 9:15 here, Australian Eastern Time. We may need to at least let me go. I may
All
let
right,
you go
no,
up
no,
the
of
stream
course you
if
can.
you're feeling like it. But wonderful conversation, and a thing I think that is, it permeates the lives of many modern people is grievances we've experienced, things that have hurt us, and to have structures with which to then endeavor to heal.
Mm-hmm.
That's, I mean, that's fucking gold.
Yeah, I agree too. And look, I really appreciate the time that you've given me tonight to chat about these things and share your knowledge and to share your humanity. And yeah, if you need to go, that's fine. Would you mind if I leave you with some closing words related to your Bruce Lee thing, actually, as well?
Absolutely, my man. I've still got a few minutes here with you.
Lovely. Well, Marcus Aurelius, who is a Stoic, as you would know, and I've got a raging hard on for Stoicism. He
Mm-hmm.
says, "It is not death that a man should fear, but rather he should fear never beginning to live." And I think that is I mean, similar to the Bruce Lee quote, and I feel like
Critical.
it's quite powerful and simple.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it reflects a sense that the goal here needs to be a sense of presence, a sense of release from thoughts of the future, baggage of the past, and certainly many Taoist philosophers, or I mean, a lot of very old philosophers will have this idea that the wealthiest man is the one who eats but knows not where his next meal comes from,
Mm-hmm.
who laughs but knows not where he'll lay his head. If you could be at joy without needing to remind yourself constantly of the next fulfillment, the next requirement, the previous grievance, well then you'd have secretly won the game without
Yeah,
needing to do any of the process, right?
yeah, right. I mean, Taoism
And
is trying to cheat mostly, which I quite enjoy.
absolutely, and well, I mean, there are paths,
Oh
and
yeah,
I find myself deeply attracted to one of those paths, which essentially is a subtle way. It's to move diagonal and realize that perhaps you are there already. Uh, but at the same time, these things are reflected. The structure is reflected in certain types of religion, philosophy, uh, and the other version is also reflected in these
mm-hmm.
kinds of philosophies. And I think the fundamental thing to aim for, especially in terms of these conversations about personal change or growth, is the best thing you could possibly do is what you're able to fucking do.
Yeah, right.
So don't pursue anything that's some kind of high esoteric situation until you get the first couple of steps through. And that's beautiful, and that's a nice thing about this system. And I think I may leave you with that.
Lovely. Well, I appreciate your closing words, and I hope you have a good little nap there, dude. And it's always good talking to you. And if you wanted, I think maybe next Tuesday I might cover some Taoism.
Oh, absolutely, my guy. I'd be super keen to tune in. I'd be happy to have a little call in as well, and I can look up something. I was looking for poems that would have been relevant for forgiveness, and bizarrely, I don't actually have too many that pop straight to the top of my fingers.
Bizarrely.
There's plenty of topics that I say I got a poem for that.
Fair.
This just didn't happen to be evening, but perhaps next time I'll have something for you. I mean, if it's Taoism, I'll certainly have some quotes or some favorite philosophies.
Of course. Well, look, I mean, it is about the conversation. So if you do want to send me anything, even if it's not related specifically to Taoism, just things to discuss, I'm very much down. And I mean, that goes for anyone viewing as well. If you have suggestions or have things you would like me to cover and share with people that are important to yourself, I'm very happy to. So, look, I'll let you go, man. It's always good.
Absolutely.
Look
Well,
forward to seeing
thank you, Skelligor, for your fucking time. I'll let you go, and we'll fucking talk soon.
Gangster. You have a good one, man. Appreciate it.
Easy. Peace.
Peace. He's a good dude. I love Richie. He's a good boy. I'm just messaging my partner. Bear with me. Well, look, thank you for joining me in the stream. Thank you for Martin FRE R5 for joining me, and H Anderson 19 for the follow on kick. I appreciate that, and I mean, if you do want to reach out to me on Discord, feel free. And they saw me tapping on stream. They're like, "Ooh, are they messaging me?" Yes, I am just messaging you. I don't have any other Discord kittens, so. But yeah, I'll leave you at that. And I mean, there are some things to, I guess, ponder. I will bring back the Enright process. We'll just close off this last part with the things to talk about, and then I may get out of your hair, everyone. So the uncovering phase. These are some good questions and guideposts for forgiving. To what extent have I denied or attempted to forget that I was, and we'll pop our music back on as well. I was quite enjoying it. To what extent have I denied or attempted to forget that I was offended and the suffering which I have experienced as a result? So the denial of suffering means that you can't ask the who, what, and whom. In what ways have I avoided feeling and dealing with my anger and suffering? So, oftentimes, like for myself, I will find that I have that victim complex mentality where I do attempt to avoid and deal with it because it's handy in the moment as a self-soothing experience. And to what extent do I experience and avoid exposing any shame or guilt? I mean, I'm trying to talk relatively candidly about these things here, but I definitely have in the past tried to avoid either social shame or self-shame about both being a victim as well as being the perpetrator. When you do bad actions, but you don't want to be a bad person, you are then not okay with them. And it's quite easy to not want to be that. And to the same extent, I don't necessarily want to be weak, but I then end up doing it. In what ways does my unresolved anger affect my physical and emotional health, relationships, and work productivity? We were talking about the negative things, the negative aspects being needed. I mean, we do it in the uncovering phase, but then it's important to that discovery phase. So that's an important thing to actually say what are the physical outcomes from that. So that's an important question to ask. To what extent am I obsessed or preoccupied with how I was offended and or with my offender? This is something that definitely resonates with me, and an important question I have to ask myself that, I mean, can be quite hard. Sometimes it's easier to like do that rumination thing where you're going back on how you were offended, and also with the actual person themselves, rather than the events and the reconciliation, or not reconciliation, sorry, the forgiveness that you need, and then that will stop reconciliation. To what extent do I compare my own life situation with that of my offender? I think that's an important question as like a almost empathy check. Like, how can you try and put yourself in those shoes? And I think, like, by trying to put yourself in those shoes, you have to ask, how am I doing it? How am I not doing it? Then also becomes highlighted. To what extent has the offense caused permanent, difficult changes in my life? I mean, that's something that they specifically outlined as needed as part of the framework. How has the offense changed my worldview, i.e., in what ways do I now believe or perceive that the world, or in this person, or God, are no longer as just or loving? I mean, there have been things, I stopped believing in God because my great-grandmother suffered at the end, quite dearly. Not dearly, quite a lot. She was in a lot of pain. And she was very devout. And she was a very good person in my eyes. And I was upset. But she was quite a strong person, and she was struck down quite quickly. As in, well, she fell ill quite quickly. She wasn't ill, and then she was ill. And she was ill for quite a bit. There was a lot of suffering, and then she passed. And that actually literally made me change my view on God, as I felt that was unjust. I was quite angry about it, and I won't go into how I lost my faith specifically, but it led me down a train of thought of questioning that. Every time I pulled an answer out, led me further away from my belief of God, and at that time, my view of the world. And I think that's an important way where I then was able to forgive the world's wrongs, or forgive God's wrongs in that scenario, that I was able to move past it, but I did still have to recognize that it would change me. And that I was in, for a period there, I was in denial about my loss of faith. I felt a lot of guilt about it. The decision phase, of course, it's important to understand what is and isn't forgiveness. To what extent do I experience that, although I have tried, I'm silly trying to forgive, I realize I emotionally haven't. To what extent do I experience that, although I've tried, or I'm sincerely trying to forgive, I realize that emotionally I haven't. Yeah, so, that's an important aspect. You might be trying to forgive someone and yet you still haven't, or trying to work through this framework and still haven't. But by asking that question, what have I tried that's not working, I think also then highlights that I realize that emotionally I haven't, may highlight some of the weaknesses or the things that you're needing to deal with first. They talked about potentially having to unpack further or more previous problems, and that's something that was part of it. And that's, I think it follows into that framework, and it's a really important question. What stops me from courageously confronting my offenders' unjust actions towards me, both internally and directly? Sometimes it can be, internally it could be things like guilt around thinking those things about someone. There could be your own lack of care about how you regard yourself. And it could also be like more realistic, like they don't let you, they yell at you, or they put you down, or they hit you, or they, you know, they might even be that they, when you bring up these things, that these people emotionally check out. Some people are quite avoidant, and they might pull away from you. And for anxious attachment styles, potentially it actually worsens the problem. So you might, by highlighting those things, you might also, I think, be able to come to answers for how you can work through it if you are trying to, by understanding those limitations of that relationship at the time. Am I willing to consider forgiving my offender? I mean, the decision phase, that's literally the point. You have to make a physical decision to forgive them. What hasn't worked for me so far in trying to forgive my offender? I mean, I guess that's important. Otherwise, you may end up just repeating the same emotional cycle. And I mean, that doesn't really do all that much in the terms of that true release. What stops me from being or becoming more willing to forgive now? I mean, that's really just asking, what have I put in front of myself as an obstacle to this? And oftentimes I think that is yourself. But I mean, I guess it's like, how is yourself doing that? To what extent have I decided to forgive? Am I committed to trying to forgive now, perhaps again? I guess there is a commitment to forgiving. You may make the choice, but I mean, you have to be sure in your choices. You have to be 100 in your choices. You can say, oh, I want to forgive them, but I mean, how much have you really done? By asking this question, you may highlight that you think you are quite committed, but you are not. Work phase. Have I developed an understanding of how I was offended in the past and immediate consequences of the offense, as well as a deeper self-compassion? Have I done step 1, where we do the explore, as well as a deeper self-compassion? Have I been able to understand myself? I think with these two, I mean, how can you feel for someone until you feel that for yourself? I mean, I guess it's really saying, like, have you given yourself love? Is how I would interpret that. In what ways have my prior attempts to understand, develop compassion for, and forgive my offender made it difficult for me to fully realize and feel the consequences of the offense? I mean, again, that's talking about that, like, I guess, limitations you put on yourself, and at each point, I guess you have to check, make sure that you are actually doing what you say you're doing, or trying to do. And they were talking earlier about the fact that we often try and skip the step with the intent of trying to reach that forgiveness without actually wanting to do that work. And I think asking these questions are good self-checks, because you do need to keep yourself in check, especially, I guess, if you are having problems with that. Like I was talking about, I find that I don't like saying I have a victim complex. Sometimes I also don't like not saying it. In what ways am I acting like I have a victim complex? I mean, you have to check yourself, because sometimes otherwise you just do it. It's autopilot. That's why it's there. That's why you're dealing with it in the first place, right? So you constantly have to self-check it, and that stuff, I think, does link into being able to forgive others, obviously. What injustice do I need to do now, if anything, to seek restitution, i.e. deal with the lingering effects of the past offences, and or to protect myself or others from actual or new offences? I mean, it's we talked about, like, justified feelings, and justified feelings, often sometimes you might feel like you need justified consequences, I would say. And I guess that's where making amends comes from as well. And you also, what's the point in forgiving someone to heal yourself and to feel better about yourself if you are then not why that isn't working. What is my offender like as a human being, and to what extent does he or she deserve my respect for simply being another human being? I think this is a point that brings us back onto that empathy. I feel like this point I may move past it into the deepening phase. In what ways have I grown through my efforts to feel and deal with my suffering and anger, and to act with compassion and mercy towards my offender? Let me read that again for myself. In what ways have I grown through my efforts to feel and deal with my suffering and anger, and to act with compassion and mercy to my offender? Again, I think this is another self-check for yourself. We need to see that we have done the work. Yeah. In what ways have I grown through my efforts to feel and deal with my suffering? That's our first steps. And to act with compassion and mercy towards my offender. That's this last part here when we do our work phase again, where we're actually giving forgiveness. And asking these questions is really asking, have I done the first steps I need to do? And have I actually given that gift? In what ways have my efforts to give set me free from unwanted emotional suffering, and free for having a better relationship with the offender, perhaps others, myself, and God? I guess that deepening phase really links it back into the fact that it is meant to be a choice within itself. And focusing on those benefits gives meaning to that suffering, as we talked about. In what ways do I recognize that I'm not alone in my suffering, that others share my suffering and I theirs, whether we suffer for the same reasons or not? I mean, Richie and I were talking about and this guy's quite influenced by his Catholic upbringing, but the Christian upbringing that this Enright feels. And if we are all sinners, or we are all perpetrators, or we are all offenders, that we must all be doing that to someone. And so we all feel these same things. I think that allows us to feel better empathy, and I feel like it's an important part of the deepening process. To what extent have I discovered my own need to be forgiven, to seek and ask for forgiveness, perhaps even from an offender, or from someone else whom I have offended? We talked about it in the deepening phase, and again, I feel like that is a really great question to ask oneself, where it's asking, like, through these things, have you found that you do need to be forgiven? And I think it's natural to assume that oftentimes you do. We are quite complicated. I mean, people might act out of emotion, just as you might have acted out of emotion when you felt slighted, even though your actions were justified. That you may find that you need to ask for forgiveness by working through problems. And would you not want, as a good person who's trying to be someone who acts with grace, if you had wronged someone, would you not want to try, and they were in a cycle of hurt, would you not want to try and make it so that they had an easier time of releasing that hurt from themselves? Otherwise, I mean, the other option is that you act selfishly to protect your own ego. And I mean, I don't think that is good behavior, to be honest. Now, what meaning am I discovering in and through my suffering? Am I trying to forgive, and if appropriate, to be forgiven? I mean, I guess not only can you try and search for your meaning, but what meaning am I discovering? Let me just reread this. I want to make sure I'm not going to talk shit. What meaning am I discovering in and through my suffering, and my trying to forgive, and if appropriate, to be forgiven? Again, I think that is where you search for that meaning to I guess give yourself importance for moving through that. That you have to ask yourself, like, what am I actually seeing through it? Because it can be easy to do all those steps and not actually pull the meaning, which is part of the steps. And as well, if appropriate, to be given, I guess, applies to that that insight in yourself, that meaning in yourself, that personal growth in yourself. And what am I learning about my purpose in life, and how may I be called to serve others? I mean, even by admitting that you are a offender, that you are, and by trying to seek forgiveness, that you are serving others. And how does that apply to the rest of your life? What are you figuring out about your place? How can you be true to yourself? You know, that's important, really. I will just slowly scroll through these additional recommended references, and I will end the stream there. But look, I do really hope that you guys had a lovely day. I will give it another closing shout out to people who are following me and support me. I would like to say, I would like to first start with a thank you to Richie for appearing on the stream. I would like to thank everyone who does watch my streams. Follow or not, that's okay. I'd like to shout out my partner, who is a big benefit in my life, who I care for deeply, and I feel gives me an expression of meaning and purpose. And really, without them, I probably wouldn't be at the point where I could even read these kinds of things and understand them. So I think sometimes they don't know that, and I just want them to feel appreciated for that, because it is important. I also would like to say thank you to the people who have followed me on Twitch. Less deep there. Travis List, thank you for following me. Revisory Bacon 12, thank you for following me. Rube's Place, thank you for following me. HPX Dreamer, thank you for following me. Groomlet Gaming, thank you for following me. Lena VR, thank you for following me. 5555, thank you for following me, subbing for me, and giving me a community sub. Big ups, dude. And as well on Kick tonight we had Martin's Frey R5, thank you for the follow, as well as Anderson19. Anyway, look, I hope you all have a really lovely day or night, or whenever it is for you, and catch you on the next stream. On the next stream, we're going to be streaming on Thursday. I'm not sure what game I'll be streaming, but I'll be streaming some solo game, potentially Baldur's Gate, potentially Ready or Not. Kind of what I'm feeling now, but at the end of the day. And on Sunday, I would like to, if there is interest, to host some more community style games. Alrighty, well, everyone have a good night, and if you missed this one, you're tuning in at the end, we'll put the VOD up on YouTube.